So, welcome everyone to what is also personally for me a very special afternoon. I have to start with a personal story. I have known Ellen from the time before I ever visited Los Angeles. The UCLA History Department and the History Department of Utrecht University, where I worked, had an exchange program which brought Ellen to the Netherlands, where I met you. And then later, on the basis of that same exchange program, I came to Los Angeles. And after that, I got a Fulbright grant, could stay here for a year. And during that year, Ellen and two other colleagues from the UCLA History Department, Ghislaine Leiden and Eric Avila, had a little film club, if you remember. Yeah, so we... Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that was really a lot of fun. But I was also extremely happy that Ellen became a member of the Wenham Museum's Council of Advisors, and I've always tremendously admired you as a person, but also as a historian, because you have this unique combination of being really clear-sighted and in a certain sense also quite radical, but combined with enormous subtlety and a sense of context that is really remarkable. I'm very happy that we can help you promote your book, your newest book, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Might be a little surprising that we are doing a book presentation here about a late 19th century women's writer and women writer and activist. But apart from the fact that there actually appears to be a connection with Cold War history, and Ellen might say more about that. The Wenham Museum is not just a museum, but also a community center, and we try to respond to what is happening in the world. And I think right now with crazy developments like the SAFE Act, which might steal away the voting rights of numerous married women and crazy pastors like Dale Partridge and others, Douglas Wilson, who actually claim now that given women the right has been a historical mistake that should be turned back. We'll talk about that, Ellen. Yeah. So I think more than ever we need really clear-sighted people with a large historical awareness to counter this absurdity. And that is another reason why I'm really happy to have you here. An official introduction, Ellen DuBois is Distinguished Research Professor of History at UCLA, a leading scholar of US women's history. Her work focuses on the political history of the women's suffrage movement, American feminism, and transnational feminism. She is the author and editor of numerous influential books and essays on women's rights and has received major fellowships, including from Guggenheim. Her earlier book publications include, and this is just a selection, Harriet Stanton Blatch and the Winning of Women's Suffrage, Through Women's Eyes in American History with Documents, co-authored, and Suffrage, Women's Long Battle for the Vote. And today, as you are seeing behind me, we are discussing her latest book. And then, as you also can see, she is not alone today. Brenda Stevenson, welcome as well. You are another formidable historian, and I understood you are working closely together right now on a new publication, and I hope we will hear more about that. But before we do so, I also want to introduce you. So Brenda Stevenson is an internationally recognized scholar of race, slavery, gender, family, and racial conflict. Her specific intellectual interests center on the comparative historical experiences of women, family, and community across racial and ethnic lines. Some of your publications I also would like to mention: Life in Black and White, Family and Community in the Slave South, The Contested Murder of Latasha Harlins, Justice, Gender, and the Origins of the LA Riots, What is Slavery? And I think your most recent book from 3 years ago, What Sorrows Labor in My Parents' Breast, A History of the Enslaved Black Family. I'm thrilled to have both of you here. You will take away the conversation after 45 minutes or so. There will be a Q&A followed by a book signing from Ellen in the garden and a reception. Please enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so very much for coming out to talk to us, but particularly to Ellen, my dear friend and colleague for many years, about her brilliant new book. We're going to start today with Ellen giving us a sort of background of why she was writing this book. First of all, one of the things you have to know, if you don't know Ellen and you don't know her work, is that every book she does is groundbreaking from the very beginning. You know, I read her first book when I was a graduate student at Yale. Every book that she has produced. Old. No, we're not that actually a difference in age, but she got out faster than I did. But nonetheless, every work that she's done has been groundbreaking, and it's been groundbreaking for, in particular, gender history, or what we used to call women's history. And she has just set the foundation for just generations of young people, young scholars who are working in this field and other fields too, and not just women's history, but also 19th century, 20th century, Gilded Age, you know, political history, social history, you name it. Her books touch on it. And so, and most recently we did a book, well, I helped her with the book that she had already done.
No, we did it together.
Well, okay, well, we did it together. And that's become the most popular, it is the most popular, I guess, survey of women's history in the US. So we're very proud of that. Ellen's just a wonderful friend, but most of all, she's a brilliant scholar. And she's gonna talk about her new book.
Well, I'm like, can't stand how strong these introductions have been. Okay, I've been living with this woman since I was in graduate school. Everything I've written, my specialty has always been how women won the right to vote. I've done other things, but that's my specialty. And so she has figured. She was the greatest philosopher and strategist of the women's rights movement when it began in this country in 1848. So I've been waiting to do this when I felt like I might have a chance of understanding her. I'm not sure I fully have. She was a very complex person with a very strong public persona. She had a very rich family life. We'll talk a little bit about that. She had 7 children who all lived rich adult lives. I mean, to have that many children and none of them died in youth or infancy in the 1840s and 1850s was quite an achievement. And the other thing that, the length of her involvement, her biography was called 50 Years and More, and she was politically and intellectually involved and active, along with her partner, Susan B. Anthony, which you may have seen in some of these pictures. She had such a long career. One of the reasons I wanted to show you these pictures is I wanted to show you the difference, her as a young woman with her first daughter, and then her as an old lady. She died in 1902 when she was, I don't know, 80-something, 87, something like that. I want to say one other thing. The other thing two other things. The other things that I wanted, that brought me to her at this point in my career, is first of all that Yus and I were talking about this. Her interests, we tend to think of the women's suffrage movement as something that's over and done, except, as he points out, a few crazies who think that they're going to undo the franchise of half the people in the world and in this country. But as I hope, as you'll see if you are smart enough to buy the book, and as we'll talk about, her interests were not just about how women got the vote, but the deeper questions about where did women's subordination come from, and what would women's full freedom look like. And those issues took her beyond the particular issue of how to vote, of women voting, and those issues are also very relevant now. One thing, for instance, is that she finished her life with something that had concerned her from the very beginning, which is the role of Orthodox Christianity, particularly Protestantism, in inculcating in women a sense of inferiority. And when she was doing that in the late 90s and early 20th century, she couldn't, other younger women did not think it was important anymore. But she was both too late, but she was too early, because we know from our own experience the role that conservative, institutionalized, clerical authority is playing now. And the other thing is that, as we will also talk about, she was a very forthright person. She wrote in her autobiography that since the time she had a nursemaid tell her not to do something, anybody who said, "You can't do this," she did it. And that was some of her strengths, but also some of her weaknesses. In the sort of high point of her post-Civil War life, when she was failing to get women the right to vote along with black men, she allowed herself, or what came out of her was some very very nasty racist comments. And for that reason, and I think we'll talk about that a little, for that reason, she has not fared well from modern feminists. It's as if that episode, which was really terrible, has wiped out her whole 50-year experience. So that was the third reason I wanted to do this book. Okay.
Great. All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your methodological process? I mean, you've written a biography before. You wrote the biography of her daughter.
Yes.
Right. How was that different? And biographies are really difficult to write, as I'm writing one now, I know that. What did you learn about writing about her daughter that helped you with the biography of her?
So she had 7 children. She had 4 sons before she could get a daughter. That's why she kept on having boys. And the daughter that I wrote about was her 6th child. Not the picture that you saw up here. Maybe we'll run them again. Her daughter's name was Harriet. And she was several of her children followed her in one way or another in her path-breaking activities, but Harriet was the one who really took up the cudgels of leading the suffrage movement into the 20th century. Elizabeth died in 1902. Harriet died in 1940. I didn't want Elizabeth to die. I wanted her to take me into the 20th century, but she wouldn't do it. But I took Harriet and followed her legacy. And so Brenda asked me what it taught me. It allowed me to approach Elizabeth from the viewpoint of her daughter. And since I had felt as a kind of fictive daughter to her, it gave me a sense of the strengths and weaknesses of being the child of such a woman. And I came to understand her daughter a lot better because of understanding for instance, Elizabeth's dedication to the privacy of personal life. And as a result, both the mother and the daughter were a little difficult for me to get to the very core of them. Her friend Susan B. Anthony, for instance, kept diaries for her whole adult life, and she was very open about talking about her emotional struggles. Elizabeth didn't, to the degree that she struggled with depression. It's hard to tell because she didn't record it. And her very charming and stimulating public self made it difficult to get into her private life. So looking at her as her daughter might have experienced her helped me to do that. I'll just say one other thing. As Brenda says, biographies are really tough. You start them and you think, oh, easy. I'll start, she gets born, and then all these things happen, and then she dies. But that's not, if you write that kind of biography, nobody will publish it. You have to turn a life into a narrative arc. And I think we probably all struggle with that in our own lives. Where has our lives taken us? And it was a real challenge to create a narrative arc for her. The other thing I did is she's mostly treated as an activist and a strategist, but she is a very profound thinker. And so I had to learn about the various philosophical waves that she followed in her long life. And so it gave me I was exposed to the intellectual history of the 19th century all to the early 20th century.
Thank you. Well, you know, one of the things I think is really interesting about her is that we know that she's been so inspirational across the years. And even though, you know, she's been a little bit canceled, you know, people are just talking about her and thinking about her thanks to you, again, in positive ways. Who inspired her? I mean, you just mentioned just a little bit about her educational background and the kinds of philosophical influences. Well, what were they? How was she educated as a young girl in the early 19th century, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, she went to what would be the equivalent of junior high school in the 1830s, in the mid 1830s. No woman had gone to college. So she went to the best, what was called an academy. It was a private school. It's still there. It's in Troy, New York, and it's called, she's shaking her head, it's called the Troy Female Academy. Anybody here went there or knew about it? Well, it's still there. Yeah. And she was educated there by a woman named Emma Willard. Emma. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, she built on that. I think it may have been helpful to her in being a very, very fine writer. Then the next person who influenced her was her cousin. His mother and her mother were sisters. They were both from the very long-standing Dutch-American family, the Livingstons. And her cousin, who was considerably older than her, was a man named Gerrit Smith. So if any of you know the history of abolition, you will know that he was one of the most important, certainly the wealthiest abolitionist in the United States. He was one of the people who helped to fund John Brown, and the failure of John Brown's fantasy of revolution, slave revolution, sort of ended Gerrit's career personally. But Elizabeth, as a young woman, having finished a school and not yet married, spent a lot of time at his home south of Syracuse. And there she met she was from a relatively wealthy family. She met a whole range of people who debated every issue at the Smiths' dinner table. There were people for and against slavery, for and against the dispossession of the native peoples, for and against a really big issue at this time, which was temperance. And so she was exposed to all this, and she also met her husband there, who at the time was a very prominent orator, speaker about anti-slavery. Frederick Douglass said he was the first abolitionist he heard speak, and he influenced him. His name was Henry Stanton. The next person I would mention is a woman about 20 years older than her, one of the often called the dean of women abolitionists. Her name was Lucretia Mott. And Mott taught her about the prior history of women's rights. For instance, Mary Wollstonecraft, who she didn't know about. From then on, there were a series of influences. Actually, interestingly, most of them were men who helped her in her long struggle to get out from under the sort of heavy weight of Christian orthodoxy. And so there are 3 or 4 such people that I came to know and know how important they were for her.
Thank you. That was really nice to hear those names again. One of the things I think, the last time we did this, was we did a book talk for you. The books, right. People asked about her family life. How could she, as a mother of all these children, be able to do the things that she was able to do? I mean, it seems as if she was the first woman to have it all, to a certain extent. So how was she? What did she think about motherhood, and what did she think about and its relationship to her political activism?
Well, she loved being a mother, and everything that her children said, she was a wonderful mother. She was fun, she was playful, she was all the things that her own mother had not been. Her own mother was a sort of stern Presbyterian. She loved, as you could, she said she never was sorry she had so many children. She was a little sorry she had them so close together. In other words, she didn't really understand about how to control her reproduction. Her first child was born in 1842, and her last child was born in 1859. That's how she felt about, she was a very active mother, and she also, in those years, the 1850s in particular, she wrote some of her most radical ideas. I'm going to see if I can find one of them to read to you.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, yeah, of course, birth control becomes a big issue in the movement during that time period.
No, it takes longer than that.
It takes longer, but people are talking about it.
Yes.
And talking about not marrying and talking about not having children and controlling how many children you have, etc.
Okay, this is 1855. So at this point, she has 5 children, okay? 4 sons and 1 daughter. And she's living in a small industrial city in the middle of New York State called Seneca Falls. We know that name because that's where she helped to organize the first women's rights convention. But it's sort of midway between Rochester and Syracuse. And she was confined there. And even though her parents had been wealthy, they did not give her a lot of money. They were not great fans of the man she married. So she had, by about this time, she had found a woman who spent the rest of her life, whose name was also Willard, Amelia Willard, as a sort of housekeeper and a member of her family. But that's it. I mean, when she grew up, her parents had probably 5 or 6 servants, including several black ones who might have started as slaves in their family. Okay, so amidst all that, this is what she writes to her cousin, Jarrett. We who have spoken out have declared our rights political and civil, but the entire revolution about to dawn upon us by the acknowledgement of women's social equality has been seen and felt but by the few. The right to hold property, to speak in public are all important, but there are great social rights before which all others sink into utter insignificance. It is not a question of meat and drinks, but of human rights. Human rights, the sacred right of a woman to her own person, to all her God-given powers of body and soul. So I think that's quite extraordinary that she was writing that when her quotidian activities were, as she says, knitting mittens and fixing scraped knees. These four boys were rambunctious to the max. The other thing I want to say is motherhood became for her also a framework, a metaphor for women's power. She thought that motherhood was not, burdened by the sins of Eve, but that it was a source of great power and influence, and every man was owed something to his mother. And so for her, motherhood was a frame that she used for women's power and women's rights.
Excellent. Thank you. You know, she's a wonderful and powerful woman of the 19th century. Did she think of herself in that way? What would have been, in her imagination, her greatest accomplishment, and what would have been her greatest failure?
Well, those are three questions.
Okay.
Let me start with the first one, which was, how did she think of herself? In addition to her episodes of public racism, the other thing that some people held against her at the time, and later people have held against her, is her arrogance. She thought she knew herself to be an extraordinary person. Brenda's already talked about her almost unparalleled ability to mix a full family life and public influence. But there was something else I wanted to say about. She had a level of intellectual self-confidence that continues to be very rare for all of us women. Mm-hmm. She got, probably partially from her father, but I think she was born with it. She knew she had an exceptional mind, and she thought of herself as an extraordinary person. But the incredible thing is, by meeting her friend Susan B. Anthony, she didn't set herself above other women. She saw her job to lift other women as high as they could be lifted. One example of this sense of her exceptional, I won't call it superiority, her exceptional quality is, in the 1880s, Frederick Douglass, who was both her friend and and with whom she had conflicts during the post-Civil War period, he married a white woman, his second wife, and everybody, black and white in the society, gave him trouble for that. It was understood at that time, Susan B. Anthony says this to Elizabeth, which is that scientifically it's been proven that for people to reproduce between the races is bad for humanity and bad for the children, and it's a scientific fact. And Elizabeth didn't accept it as a scientific fact, but she also believed in the rights of individuals to make their own private decisions. Who they married, when they married, how many children they had, when they had them, if they had any of them. So the idea that anybody would challenge, in general, challenge a person's right to marry as he wished, but especially she saw Frederick Douglass as somebody like her. He'd been born in slavery, she'd been born to wealth, but she believed that they were both exceptional people, and that anybody, of all the people who sort of were not their equals, had dared to tell them what to do, was unacceptable to her. And I have to tell you, Douglass thought of himself in the same way.
He sure did.
Okay, that was the first question. The second question was
Her greatest accomplishment.
her greatest
in her event.
accomplishment. That's really hard. I would have to say she might have thought about her children as her greatest accomplishment, because so many of, and this takes me to the other question you have, her disappointments or failures, her vision, her ambitions for women's freedom were so broad that they were all at some level disappointed. Most famously, and this was the most difficult period in her life, when the post-Civil War amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments were ratified, she and Susan were determined to get the full range of American citizens enfranchised. And when she was the 15th Amendment says it forbids the disfranchisement on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Republican Party supported it because they felt very strongly and somewhat correctly that the freed black former slave men would support the Republican Party and would be the basis of making it a Southern party. But they had, the Republican Party could expect no such thing from women. Women ran the range of political opinions. She failed, of course, to get the word "and sex" included in the 15th Amendment. It was almost 50 years. It was 48 years between when the 15th Amendment was passed and the 19th Amendment was passed. And the 19th Amendment is written exactly as the 15th, except instead of race, color, and previous condition of servitude, it says sex. And this was her first great disappointment. And the other was that she was unable to stir an awareness among the many American women who now followed her, who had college educations and had professions, but did not share her sense that religious authority was a great burden to women, and that they needed to be able to think for themselves about these matters. And that was the great disappointment of the end of her life, for which she was basically excommunicated, not from the church, but from her own movement, from the women's rights movement.
I want to thank everyone for coming and staying. And I think that Professor DuBois will be signing books
outside.
Outside, and you can follow up with your discussions of her out there. And please do buy the book. It is quite wonderful.
I have a little present. I have some postcards that you can use with this on the cover. So I'd be happy. I got a lot of them, so I'd be happy.
Thank you.